So thank you all for coming to the first event in the Live Talk series, which is part of the Live Queensland Band Culture Exhibition program. So as part of the Live Talks, what we wanted to do was delve into Queensland's music past and explore the context and inspiration behind some of the biggest contemporary music success stories over the past 4 decades. So the series is hosted by Noel Mengel, who's the chief music writer for the Courier Mail, and he has been covering, as many of you well know, he's been covering contemporary music for some 30 years now. So Noel will be interviewing a special guest roughly from each decade as they share the stories behind their rise to prominence, as well as their ongoing creative endeavours. And what we hope to see is at the heart of each story is community and camaraderie, the bands, the fans, and the places that inspired them. So tonight we're very privileged to hear the story of Robert Forster, who, as you would well know, is from the internationally renowned band, the Go-Betweens. So I'll hand over to Noel to introduce you to Robert and begin tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you can all hear us loud and clear. I'm Noel. I've just had the most brutal day of 8 hours of computer training and the sacking of 3 editors. So I'm really pleased to be here talking to Robert about something we love. And welcome, Robert. We've talked a bit over the years, Robert. We've talked a lot. But let's begin at the beginning. Many of you are probably Brisbane people. You might have similar kind of memories to us. I wasn't a Brisbane kid growing up, but the music you heard and the music was around then, top 40 radio, all of those kind of things, they were influential. They were kind of crucial in a lot of ways in your formation.
Yeah, when I was young, I was the eldest in my family, so I had no older brother or sister passing down records to me. I had to discover it myself, and I was in a family that were not musical, and so my only access to music that came to me was through AM radio. That was the only music that was in our house. And that's what I was exposed to as a young boy who had no idea that I was ever going to have anything to do with music in my life. It was just filtering through the air, and it just awoke something in me, and it started there.
The reason I mentioned that, it's come through in your music. You believe in the short song form. You love the pop song structure. That was really been a crucial part of your musical development, wasn't it?
It was. I don't know if it started there, but I had no prog rock phase, and I had no, Irish grandmother playing me 22 verse songs on a fiddle. I was listening to. In the radio and that I was talking about, you had to sort of get in and get out in about 2 minutes 40 if you were saying anything. And I don't know if that had any sort of lasting influence on me as a songwriter, but listening to early things like that magic run of Creedence Clearwater Revival singles, that Who'll Stop the Rain, Proud Mary, Down on the Corner, all of those songs seem to, that's just one example of someone, John Fogerty, the songwriter, putting across a feeling in fairly everyday language and getting that mood over and getting sometimes a story over in 2 minutes 30 and achieving that and it being played over the radio.
I can remember a crucial thing that happened to me, Starman on the radio. David Bowie, glam, was that of interest to you? Did that?
Bowie was.
Yeah.
Bowie was crucial. Bowie's always crucial.
Mm.
It was the same with me with Starman. It caught a lot of people, that record. You talk to a lot of musicians around my age, around your age, which is similar. That was just a defining moment, that record. And it didn't go to number one, but it was a hit, a top 20 hit in Australia. And when I heard it in Brisbane, it just, I keep coming back to it, woke me up. The Bowie's voice, that 12-string, the melody, it sounded like nothing else. Mm. And even when I heard it when I was 14 or 15 when it first came out in 1972, even though I knew absolutely no rock history, it was like the 60s were over. Like, this is post-Beatles. This is something that John Lennon couldn't do or Paul McCartney couldn't do. Mm. Starman. It was new, and it was very attractive.
Mm. And then music is not only audio, it's visual, and Bowie was intensely visual, that time was intensely visual. Yeah.
I mean, when you think, he was far better looking than anyone in the Beatles or the Stones. And there was that, and he played on masculine, feminine far heavily than anyone else had done up until that point. He was androgynous. It looked, he was a very, very it was very confusing. If you were 14, 15, 13, you're a boy or a girl fan, and you saw Bowie, he was sending out a very complicated, confusing message because he was so pretty in a way, but he was a man, and that was almost as revolutionary as his music. Mm.
Were you buying records? Did you have a little record player?
I did, but I had to have a job to buy the record player. Like, my parents they weren't anti-music, but they just weren't interested. Mm. It was a very typical Brisbane family, sports mad. Mm. And I was part of it. I was sports mad too. But music led me away. So I bought a record player. I had a job in the city, working one summer at Woolworths. There used to be Woolworths in town on Adelaide Street. It went a whole block. It went over to Queen Street when there must have been traffic going down it. And I worked there, and I earned enough money to buy a record player, and then I started to buy albums and some singles. Although I was never, and I've never been a big buyer. Mm. I've always been someone who's bought a couple of records and studied them. I'm not someone like Ed Cooper. Mm. Ed Cooper's got thousands of records. And I know people that have thousands of records, but I sort of bought a couple and listened to them a lot.
So you're in this sports mad family. Was there thoughts of a guitar? Did you see other guitar players?
Yeah. No, I had a friend at school who started to play the nylon string guitar, and then I got one. And it was as simple as that. I just fell into it like that. If my friend hadn't bought one, this is when around the age I was 15, I don't know if I'd have bought one. I just fell into it. It was, I had no leads or there was no role models in front of me in any way. No one in my family played a musical instrument. I just fell into it, and with that, just that ear for the radio, I had a guitar in my hand, Bowie. I was reading the music press by that stage. I was like 15, 16, so I was reading like Melody Maker. I was reading maybe Australian Rolling Stone. I was reading Ghost Set. So I was up on the groups and stuff like that. It was a developing thing, and so the guitar sort of fell into that as well, and I started to play.
Mm. And then comes university, and there's that time when sport doesn't seem quite so important as it once did. There's other things. Away. Yeah, other things. Mm-hmm. And you start to meet a lot more people like yourself, I think happens at university.
Yeah, it did. I went to Queensland University in 1975. Really, it was a refuge. I went there with no career in mind. and I just went there so that I wouldn't fall into, I was very scared of getting a job and getting a girlfriend and falling into a system that I knew that I wasn't really built for. That was a realisation, but I was a very confused person. I was a very confused teenager in my late teens, and so I was searching for things, and I just sort of had a feeling if I was at university, I wasn't going to get caught up in things that I might lose my way, whatever my way was, and I might meet some people, and that's where I met Grant McLennan, and Grant was the first person that I met that was like me, that was going to university doing an arts degree and did not want to be a school teacher, was doing it to hang around the Toowong village and go to films and buy records and do the degree, and maybe by the time you're 20, some realisation comes that something else might follow. He was the first person that seemed to be drifting the way I was drifting.
This was the meeting which was one of the great, one or two of the, was the great male friendship of your life, and it was the making of your life. Before you just, I'm sure there were many long nights of talking and laughter before you ever got to think about forming a band.
Yeah.
Or did that come early?
No. There was, I knew Grant for 2 years before, because he was similar to me. He wasn't a musician, you know. And this is something about the Go-Betweens was, it didn't start as a musical group. You know, the Go-Betweens aren't five guys bonding on the blues. You know, it's not people that are meeting through a practice. You know, bands that do this are fine, are great. Every band has its own story. And so, but ours wasn't a typical one, and that we weren't gigging, practicing musicians. We started from a whole other thing. Grant didn't play when the band started. I'd done 3 shows. You know, none of us had done time in cover bands. We started almost from a non-musical background. It was more an ideas thing. I just started to write songs, and I convinced Grant. The band was almost like a concept. It was, we were 20, you know, and Grant was 19 when the band started. It was almost like the closest band to us in a way was the Monkees. You know, it was like you hang around a house, you write great songs, you have wacky adventures, you meet strange characters, there's lots of laughter. That seemed to be about the closest thing to our band. That's the way we started.
Yeah. Were you going out to see bands?
No, not really. This was an age in Brisbane in the 70s where there was very, very few international bands played, and I had a belief when I was 19 or 20 that there wouldn't be a great Brisbane band until I started it, and so I knew enough about, I went to music shops and things like that, and I was taking lessons up at the Academy of Music, guitar lessons. So I'd sort of see guys in bands, and I'd read the notices on the wall in record shops, and there was always, you know, into Uriah Heep and Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin. You can't imagine the orthodoxy of this was. And so everyone in Brisbane was playing a sort of boogie heavy metal. And so I just knew there wasn't anything there. But I didn't know if I was going to start anything or do anything. I just fell into songwriting by accident, and then I met Grant, and it was almost the most unmusical person. Well, no, that was the miracle of the band. It was that he was musical. You know, many people form bands with their best friends, and it falls over quite quickly because the other person can't grow as a musician, or Grant could very, very quickly. That was the miracle of the band, that he was like, you know, this is a gross exaggeration, but it's like when Lennon and McCartney met, they were both players. But imagine if Lennon had met McCartney, and Lennon was a player and McCartney had never picked up a musical instrument. You know, it was more like that. But then Lennon finds out, although McCartney can't play, he's a natural. And that's what it was like with Grant. It was just this, he just flew on it. But I didn't see much. I saw Lou, I saw Roxy Music at Festival Hall in 1973-4. I saw Lou Reed, who played her in 75, and I saw Blondie at Her Majesty's in 77. And they were three very, very vital shows. But that's only 3 shows. That's all I saw.
It can't be emphasised enough what an impressive individual Grant was, because not just his musicality. I mean, he was a guy who was writing brilliant film reviews.
Yes.
He was an impressive person in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, he was. He was like when I met him, he was like a boy wonder. He was an astonishing 18-year-old, astonishing 19-year-old. He was far more impressive than I was, and he was, when I met him at 18, like he was working he was virtually programming the Chanel Theatre, the cinema there. He was writing for Cinema Papers, which was the biggest cinema magazine. He had a great knowledge of film, poetry, literature. He was flying through his degree. He was very, precocious. But he was a very, very. He was like a boy wonder. He was impressive.
But the other thing that can't be emphasised enough for people who weren't there was something else was in the air, the DIY aesthetic of punk and new wave. The fact that the Saints, who in some ways felt like ancient history in Brisbane, it seemed like something that had happened many years before, even though it was only two or 3 years previous, December 76, I think they left. So there was that, but that was out there, people were doing things, but they didn't stop and wait for record companies. They made things happen.
No, the Saints were a great role model for us. The Saints had a plan which fitted us, because the Saints in their way had the plan was, like write a classic song, record it in Brisbane, send it overseas, get signed to a big English record company, and then fly over to London and start living in Chelsea and making albums, that come around the world. It seemed like a fantastic dream. And to Grant and I, who, again, if you can imagine us in sort of the monkey's house, that seemed like, that just seemed like the way to go. We didn't even, we went from Brisbane, we were here for 2 years and put out 2 singles in the late 70s. And then we went straight to London. We didn't even bother going down to Sydney or Melbourne. It just didn't seem, it seemed like wasted energy. It seemed like, well, we've got to conquer the world. We've got to have as much energy as we can for that. Why burn it around the Sydney circuit or around the Melbourne circuit for years? This is what I still say to bands. When I tell them, but I can't. I think you can get lost by playing too often, and I think you've got to keep moving. And anyway, that's what we did at that time.
I've still got my copy of Lee Remick, $2.50 from the record market.
That's your pension, Noel. Put it on eBay. Yeah.
No, I won't be putting it on eBay, Robert.
No, wait another 10 years.
I'll be keeping it. It's still
Okay.
The $2.50 sticker has faded somewhat.
Okay.
But that was, for me, that was, wow, these guys did this. They had some good songs, and this is pivotal in the Go-Between story. Songs, good songs, and great songs.
Yeah,
You didn't wait. You had a couple of great songs, and you went for it.
Yeah. It's all about songs. It's being in a band, and we just love writing them and love we love songwriting, we love classic songwriters, or, we love songs. And to me, it was all about songs, and with Grant, it was all about songs. It was almost, songs were more important than musicianship. I knew 1,000, good guitar players. I'd see them around Brisbane or wherever I was. And which is great, if you want to be a great musician. But often, I just saw that not many of them were writing songs. You either, you pick up an instrument and you're either going to be a great virtuoso as a musician, or you're going to be a songwriter. There's very few that are both. And so we plunked for songs, for the sheer fact that, we weren't going to be great musicians, And that's where, for us, bands like the Velvet Underground were very, very influential, because they weren't historically great musicians, but they had great songs. And that was a fantastic... They didn't have the look, or they didn't play like musos. They sort of had somehow these fantastic songs came, but the band seemed to be barely competent on their instruments, which just seemed like to me like a fantastic combination. But we were always, Grant and I were always, songs, it's all about songs, the whole music industry, bands, success, glory, it's all based on songs, and that's what we concentrated on.
Brisbane in the 70s, it's viewed as, in retrospect, not just politically turbulent, but as somewhat of a cultural wasteland. However, you don't know that when you're growing up anywhere, really. And there were creative people around. It was a creative time. There were enough.
It was. I thought it was an immensely creative time. I think what happened was Brisbane didn't offer anything for you at that time beyond the age of about 24, 23. There was no path. There was no encouragement from the government or from anywhere, really. And so anyone can run until they're 23, 24 on natural energy. And that's what everyone was had, because there was no support. And so that's what people did. So there was a lot of, young, creative people, and then they hit a wall around that age, and a lot of people left. We'd meet them in Sydney, we'd meet them in London, and that's what they were doing, because there wasn't there wasn't enough to hold you here, unfortunately, at that time.
But there was this scene, there was a pop aesthetic in Brisbane music. There were people around. There was you, there was the Riptides, Peter Milton Walsh was developing, did a great single with the Early Apartments, and even the Saints, for that matter, loved pop music. Short, sharp, they're as much about 60s pop as they are about loud guitars too. So there was, Sydney seemed to have the Detroit, Brisbane seemed to have the pop.
Yeah, it was. I don't know really why that was, The Bee Gees came from here, and that was, I don't know, it's the water, the mountains. I don't know. Golden Circle pineapple rings, I don't know. It's something in our blood,
But it could be a tough... and there was oppression here, let's face it, you could get picked on.
Definitely.
If you're young with a guitar, it was hard.
Yeah, it was. I found them, a difficult thing was, a lack of encouragement, and it wasn't only in rock and roll either, Noel. People left in theatre, people left in photography, architects left, doctors left. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just rock and roll people, it went through the whole of society. It was a whole strata of people working in hospitals, whatever. A lot of people at that time left because they just couldn't take the stupidity. It's basically, it was just too mind-numbing and too demeaning to, put up with it. And it was, the whole regime at that time was obviously corrupt. Everyone knew, and so it was hard to believe in it.
Yes.
And take it, and be there.
It's difficult to imagine now when everyone's so connected. They see everything instantaneously everywhere in the world. Brisbane, yes, was a long way away, but it wasn't that far. People could still get on a plane. People could still read the pop papers. You could still buy Roxy Music records.
Yeah.
You weren't that disconnected from the world. And I think you said to me once, there's something to be said for a bit of solitude at the beginning of a career.
Yeah. No, that was true. There was lots of room to dream, and that was important too. It was what's Paris like? What's New York like in winter? What's Mexico like? And they were good thoughts to have, when you're starting anything, but as again, like that isolation, which was really important in doing something, not being bombarded and having room to move and having room to fall on your face and make a fool of yourself on stage and write shitty songs and then get better. It's okay at that time. It's different now, but at that time, again, that only gets you to the age of 23, 24, 25. You can only run on that energy, that isolation energy, for so long, and then you've got to go somewhere and be confronted and throw what you've got out at the world.
But it is important in a really important thing I see in the bands that I write about is this, or anybody with any kind of artistic career, is having a distinctive, authentic voice of their own. That's sort of what maintains, nobody mistakes the Go-Betweens for, REM or David Bowie for Mark Bolan even, or Mick. Yeah, the Rolling Stones are a little blues band from London, but no other little blues band sounds like the Rolling Stones. That's a vital thing to have, and I can see where people are in big industry towns, they're getting told, you do this and you will do well, and that's not helpful either.
No one was telling us what to do. No one with any authority. I don't know if Grant and I were listening anyway, but I think that, that's true, but that just came through almost force of personality. And also, when you start something, you see what everyone else is doing, and of course your natural reaction has to be, we're not going to do that, and then the problem is trying to find out what you can do that is your own, and that's where with Grant and I and the start of the Go-Betweens was, okay, well, unlike the Rolling Stones or Daddy Cool or the Masters Apprentices or Led Zeppelin, we went to Queensland University. That's something that they didn't do. We've driven in a car through Red Hill. They haven't done that. We've driven through the valley at 9:00 at night. The Stones haven't done that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you just start to go, a penny drops, and you start to go, okay, well, let's just work with what we got here, and this is ours, and you start to put that into what you do and not try and ape what other people are doing, because they're doing it a million times better than you anyway.
So you headed for the UK, Glasgow, I think. What did you find, and did you feel like...
Well, London was... I don't know. I think we would have been better going to South America or or Vietnam, or well, no, not Vietnam at that time, but India, or I think we, or Greece, or we, as you know, like London is like a suburb of Melbourne.
Yeah.
It's not as different as we wanted it to be, but that's where we went, and that's where we go, because that's where the music business was, and that's where all the records were being made that we liked, and that was what drew us. But as a place, it was tough, And it's always tough in London. It's tough in London now, unless you go there with £500,000. It's a tough town. And we lived there for 5 years, and it was always, it's the toughest time I've ever known in my life. And it was the same for the rest of the band. It was always, and I'm talking about money and accommodation and lifestyle. But we had to do it because people were paying us money to make albums there, and it was where we wanted to be.
And the band formed, Lindy, Robert Vickers, and then Amanda as the band developed. I think a great thing when I look back at those albums from the 80s is you can see this growth in the band. You can see these. You can see them getting better. You can see them growing and moving. Some bands just stay the same and make the same record. If you listen back to those albums, it's a wonderful kind of trip to take to see that development.
I think the simple answer to that, and it's probably a bit plain, is that we were getting older, and it was just natural development. We were curious, and it's not, once you're in, there's two ways of viewing things. There's from the outside when you see it, and even back on my own life or back on these albums, there's the historical thing where you can see all the tunings and you can see, oh, they do that, and then they do that, and then they do that. And then there's the actual thing of being in it, and when you're in it, it's about that far from your face. Do you know what I mean? And you're just going from album to album, tour to tour, song to song, town to town, day to day, and you're totally immersed in the moment. And so a lot of it's just done by gut instinct and just nature and luck and what comes around the corner. And we just proceeded, and it's just built in from the start of the band as well, like what I was saying, we started as a very non-traditional rock band, and in a way we kept on going like that. It just kept on moving like that. And when you mentioned the people that are in the band, also, both Lindy Morrison and Robert Vickers were Brisbane people, and so that seemed important to us as well. Like you didn't, we weren't auditioning, exclusively, or like it that wasn't a primary factor, but and then like Amanda Brown comes in, and she's 21, and she's at least 5, 6, 7 years younger than the rest of the people in the band. But she's just the next one, in a way, to be cast into the group. It's like a theatre of travelling players.
And many of the great bands in the world are songwriting partnerships, and these songwriting partnerships work in all kinds of different ways. Grant arrives with a song like Cattle and Cane. And that, I can only imagine what that does to another writer.
Well, yeah, I mean, he just flew, but in a way, Grant wanted to be a film director or a film reviewer, and I guess it's one of the things when I knew that everything that he was, and I was talking about the Boy Wonder before, and everything that Grant had, all that fire, was going to go into whatever he wanted to do, and when I asked him to join the band and I'd teach him to play the bass, I knew he'd write songs. I could see it. I was a very unperceptive and blind 21-year-old. I predicted nothing, but I could see that. That's one of the few things that I could see, that he would write songs that basically, because I saw a lot of talented songwriters get yes people in their bands, and I knew that I was good, but I didn't know how good, and I need to pick the strongest team, and so I, like Grant, I knew was just going to push me, and it was like, going back to, and I'm going back to Lennon McCartney again, but like Lennon got McCartney, and like Lennon was leading the band. I mean, John Lennon, even at 17, must have been, a real, excuse the language, a real motherfucker. Like that, he would have been a heavy guy at 17, Lennon, And so, but even he goes, there's a talented, very talented person that he could probably feel in his bones, couldn't even say it, was going to push him and tear at him and be at his throat. And Lennon goes, yeah. You know, and in a way it was the same with Grant. I knew we had to have the strongest team to try and take the band as far as we could, you know. And so when he starts to write great songs in the 80s, you know, it's a surprise to me how good they are, but in a way it's not a surprise because I know how good he is. You know?
I'm not going to go in depth into the making of, you know, we could go on all night about the making of those albums and the things that went right and things that might have gone wrong.
Yep.
I just thought a good one to focus on might be 16 Lovers Lane.
Sure.
Because there's something very Brisbane in that story because you came home.
Yeah.
So the band had been through these really tough years.
Yeah.
You'd maintained the focus, you'd kept going, you'd made great records.
Yeah, yeah.
You were touring back here, you know, maybe once or twice a year. You had a good audience here too.
Yeah.
But some great songs tumbled out where it all began, back at home.
Yeah. And the end of '87, the band had been in London for 5 years. And the band came back from London. We'd made our fifth album, Tallulah, and we decided to move back to Australia and record our next album in Australia. And the rest of the band went to Sydney. And in about early November '87, I came back to Brisbane and moved in with my parents out at the Gap. And it was like, it was very inspirational in a way because, you know, my parents both were working then full time. So I had the house to myself. My brother had moved out. And, you know, like mum and dad would go off to work early in the morning. And I'd sort of get up out the Gap at about, you know, like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And I'd put on, I had 2 records. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA and the second Jesus and Mary Chain album. And I'd play them and I'd make myself some coffee. And then I just started to write songs. And it felt like I was just back to where I didn't know anyone in Brisbane. You know, like everyone had gone and I just walked around the Gap shopping centre and then walk home and mum and dad had come home, sit in front, you know, I was a full-blown rock star, you know. But I was just walking around the Gap, you know, and no, but what was great was I knew, you know, that we were going to be doing an album down in Sydney, that it was going to be a big budget, you know, and we were trying to get Mark Wallace to produce it, and Mark had just done, you know, the latest U2 album, and he'd just done the Talking Heads album. They were the 2 albums he'd done before he did us. So, you know, like we had this, it was a shot, you know, like it was, I was writing these songs and I knew that I was going to take them down to the band down in Sydney and that we were going to, you know, like be in a big Sydney studio in 301. And so I was, you know, I was just back where I began and I was then 30, you know, 1987, I was 30 and I'd lived in Brisbane so I was 21. You know, I sort of felt like an unknown hometown hero, you know, just sort of walking around the Gap and just writing songs and listening to Jesus and Mary Chain and Springsteen. It was great. I loved it. I was sitting on the back veranda, do you know what I mean? And just playing golf with my brother, you know, all those sort of, you know, going into town, not knowing anyone. You know, I went and saw a band. I went and saw a band called Love's a Blur. And I walked in and, you know, I knew no one. It was Brisbane 1987. And I looked at this band and no one came up to me, no one blinked an eye. And in a way that was great. You know, and I just, okay. You know.
For people outside of bands, it's very hard to understand the pressures and the stresses and strains. You decided to split the band. It was almost a relief in a way because to try and keep this thing going, it's very hard to explain to people how hard it is to keep it going.
Yeah.
But that was felt like a relief, didn't it? Really.
It was. The band had been going by that stage. The band broke up at the end of 1989, and it had been going for 11 years. You know, I can remember Grant saying to me, you know, at that time, I've never played music with anyone else but you. You know, and you know, in my ego bubble, I hadn't even really thought of that. You know, it was like, yeah, okay, you know, I can understand why you want to do that. You know, bands break up. Bands that have been going for longer than 2 years break up for a lot of reasons. You know, bands that have been going for under 2 years break up for like one or two reasons. You know, like, you've slept with my girlfriend, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or you insulted my mother, I'm out of here. Do you know what I mean? And those big things happen in the first couple of years. When a band's going for 6 or 7 years, you slept with my girlfriend, I can live with it. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You threw a beer at my father's face, okay. He probably deserved it. But you know, and sort of bands get thick-skinned, and so when a band breaks up after 11 or 12 years, normally there's a lot of things. And with any band, it's just a lot of things, small things. Bands break up at that stage for many reasons. And it was the same with the Go-Betweens. You know, like I could list 30, bum, 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 bum. And one day, 1 month or whatever, it reaches a critical mass. And you just go, scale is tipped. No, can't do it anymore. And amazingly enough, for the people that scale tipped was for Grant and I, you know, and we both left. We broke up the band. The one that we'd started was like, well, the band's over, you know. And when I did an album after that called Danger in the Past, and I'd front up to my first interviews, and people were going, so you and Grant had a big fallout, and you broke up the band. It hadn't even occurred to me. People thought that it was he and I had this massive falling out, and that's what tore the band apart, which wasn't true. But I hadn't even thought of that. Do you know what I mean? I got, you know, confronted with that in interviews, and I had to say, no, it's like both of us had enough. You know, like, you know, I'm still on the phone to Grant, you know, like I'm still talking to him, you know. But it's a number of reasons, many reasons.
Yeah.
We'd be here for 3 weeks.
And that was good for you both to do those solo records.
Yep.
But you started doing some tours together again, and then this beautiful thing happened, which nobody could have predicted or foreseen. And in retrospect now, what an amazing thing happened. You had a new lineup of the band.
Yeah.
And you did those 3 albums.
Yeah.
And it might not have happened.
Yeah.
But it did happen.
Yeah. It was, especially in hindsight, you know, with Grant passing in 2006, it's wonderful that there was that second act for the band. And basically it was like, you know, being back in 1978, we just sort of picked it up again. You know, it was just like, let's go. And that's what brought me back to Brisbane. You know, like I was living in Germany with my wife and our very young children at that stage. And it was like, well, if the band's going to go again, we had to be in the same town, because neither of us wanted to be the Go-Betweens. If the Go-Betweens are going, it takes over, you know, it's important. And so we had to be in the same town. It wasn't going to be a band that existed on email, you know, or, you know, we'd meet up every year, and the Go-Betweens is too much of a convoluted, strange, involved, magic thing that needs that closeness, you know.
I'll share a little memory. Grant's place, New Farm, jacarandas, I think, were they, or Poncianas outside the window. You and he there, you'd been writing songs, cups of tea. I think it was around that, possibly working towards a Rachel Worth.
Right.
You know, you're talking.
Oh, yeah.
I thought, this is going to work.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful memory. you guys have been writing songs all morning
Yeah.
and just doing what you'd always done. And it felt
Yeah,
very
it
comfortable
was.
and natural.
It was. It was always a strange, the same way of working was that Grant didn't drive. And so I always drove over to his place the whole time. The whole time the band was existing from, I was driving over to Grant's place, before the band started as a student. And I was driving over to his place right to the end. It was always, I'd go over and, there he'd be, and that's the way it worked.
Losing Grant, of course, was a terrible blow for you, for everybody. You had a beautiful memory, I think, one of the last times you went over to see him and in the letterbox.
Yeah. He was, it was a copy of the New York book review, and the Grant got airmailed from New York, and it was like to me when I saw that, which was on the last visit that I went over there, it was like right at the start, like when I walked into his house, into his bedroom for the first time, he just had every periodical you could imagine, on subscription, and was just devouring them every week, every month. And, to see that again, it was just like a reminder of that from, right at the beginning.
Yeah. We're probably running out of time, but Robert, since the end of the Go-Betweens, you've pursued your journalism, your writing. It's been a great thing to work. That's been great for you, a thing that you could combine with raising your family and being here in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And you're continuing to develop that.
Yeah, I haven't recorded for about, I haven't been in the studio for 5 or 6 years, and it's a period of trying to produce things, and maybe things will come out in the future. It's a time of hibernation.
Yeah. But I'm sure there's songs still flowing, and we're looking forward.
Yeah, there are.
We're looking forward to hearing them in the future. There's plenty else we could talk about. Why don't we get a few questions from people, because we're starting to run out of time. So if anybody would like to put up their hand if they've got questions, we've got a microphone coming down here.
If no one wants to ask any questions, we could just keep on talking.
Yeah, we can just keep on talking, of course.
I just wanted to know, I'm a really big fan of the song Karen, and I just wanted to know how you came up with that sound. That sound is, I think, so nothing that anyone had done in Brisbane at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the process when you make that kind of sound? Was that just you guys getting together and just jamming, or?
No, it's the sound is rock and roll almost down to its bare bones. It was just rhythm guitar and bass and very simple drums, and it was just a pure sound. Obviously, we were listening to bands like the Velvet Underground and Jonathan Richman, the Modern Lovers, and things like that. But it was just it was primitive, because there was almost, we could hear that it was just bare bones, and we're playing through these amplifiers called Vase amps that were made in Brisbane. It's very much a Brisbane sound, and there were these amps that everyone played through. That's the technical side of it, but it was one other thing. It's practicing in houses as well. It's not playing. We weren't practicing in practice rooms with PAs and stuff like that. A lot of, I think, the Brisbane sound that Noel was talking about before comes from also playing in lounge rooms. It's a lounge room sound.
Which is where
It's a Red Hill Paddington lounge room sound. I'm still searching for it. I still love it.
Which is where some of your early shows were, of course.
Yeah.
Lounge rooms.
Yeah, we used to play in houses. A lot of bands used to go and see bands in houses, especially Toowong. I've seen great bands in houses.
Hi, you mentioned briefly Glasgow. I was just wondering how being there was changed your sound at all, particularly with Orange Juice and those sort of bands?
Yeah, I think the main thing with seeing, especially Orange Juice, were an amazing band. That is still the most probably amazing 40 minutes of rock and roll I ever saw. Was seeing Orange Juice in 1980, and also we knew them, and so that was good because we knew Brisbane bands in 1978, 79, who were good, but we got to see a world-class band like with Orange Juice before they became famous, and we were friends with them and were playing with them. We played some shows with them, and for Grant and I it was enormously educational. That Orange Juice were the first great band that Grant and I ever got to meet and hang out with. And so it was very impressive, and they were an amazing band. Still, yeah, it was very educational almost for him and I. And they were, incredible people. Very funny.
I've got a question. Still to this day, it's really tough for bands doing interesting original work to get noticed,
Mm-hmm.
and they often have to go overseas before they get noticed.
Right.
Here, that certainly was the case. The Go-Betweens had some fans, but you, Nick Cave, the Triffids, Died Pretty, a lot of people were doing it. It almost, to this day, it's much the same, isn't it? To really get some notice.
Yeah,
People start to pay more attention, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to disagree. And I'd look at a band like Tame Impala, who obviously I think have, totally on the international stage, and have not needed to go and live in New York for a year or live in London for 3 years. And I think with the internet and the way things are now, I think that's broken down to an extent. I think it had to happen back in the 80s, but I think that bands now, it's a lot more, you can go a lot further with technology. You don't have to travel as much to set something up. And I think, I wish I had more examples beside Tame Impala. I mean, Cloud Control are about to put out an album that's probably going to do well internationally, but they've been in London for the last couple of years. So, there's one for you, But I think the success of Tame Impala out of Australia, they play on all the big festivals, and Pitchfork, and everyone just loves them, and they can play all around the world, and they've done none of those old traditional hard yards in London or Munich or Berlin or LA. And I think maybe with Australian bands, that'll be more the model than what Nick Cave or what we did. I think that's going to be the way it's going to go, perhaps.
Your time at university was obviously quite formative, both for your biographical journey but also your musical journey.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what inspired you at that time. Were there kind of intellectual currents you were swimming with or against, or were you railing against the system, or were you getting into the books?
In the late 70s at Queensland University, a big thing then was feminism. Was definitely. I don't know how much of an influence on me, but that was very much the atmosphere out there. I studied I remember this the other day. I studied The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing. I was in a tutorial group with 12 women and myself, with a complete feminist, feminist teacher, and I got a 5 out of 7. Which I thought was pretty good. I know the Golden Notebook backwards. And cinema was fantastic, which I was getting a lot through Grant, and Grant was, cinema was very vital at that time. In terms of literature, I was almost getting a lot more off campus through music at that time. There's times when books are really at me, and there's times when music is really at me. At that time, 1977, 78, 79, 76, when I was at university, music was very strong. So basically, I was going into town and buying, Talking Heads and, television and all of that sort of stuff. Out at the university, the main thing that I got was I was in the drama department, and I was doing, the main thing I got out of Queensland University was the 20th century surrealist plays. We did a semester of that, and so it was, it was Pinter, Ionesco, Brecht, Pirandello, all of those plays. And what was great for me as a distracted 19-year-old was you could read them in about 50 minutes. And they were laugh out loud funny, and we'd study them and we'd read them in class. And these really knocked me out, Beckett, all of that. And all of this found its way, into some of my songs and stuff like that. That was the main thing I got out of it, was those plays and doing them for a year with Grant. And so somehow all of that filtered back into the band. I don't know how, but it did.
I probably more so than my friends am happy to be in Brisbane, mostly because of the live music scene here.
Yeah.
And just having lots of great bands like Velociraptor or Moldy Lovers just around. I just wanted to know what you think of Brisbane music scene right now, and if you have any favourite bands or groups.
I think it's really good and has been for a while. I think there's good venues. I think the support system within the bands is good. I think it's still possible to get a half decent practice room. I think it's a supportive scene, and I think there's opportunities. And I still think it's really good for Brisbane bands, because I think in Sydney and Melbourne you can still get, especially in Sydney bands. I mean, when was the last great band that came out of Sydney? Do you know what I mean? A long time ago. I think bands get crushed there because I think living costs are so high that it's very hard to concentrate on what you can do. I think around Brisbane you can still bum around a bit and give the band lots of time, and unemployment's at 5%, so you can work part-time, you can get a cafe job, and you can be pouring everything you can into the group. I think my tip for the top, John Still Singers have made a great album, and I like them a lot. They're friends of mine, so I'm biased, but I think they're really interesting, really good pop group, and they've made their albums getting mixed at the moment, and I think they're really good. I'm connected a little bit to more, like I'm connected through working with them. I'm connected through also, I produce a band called Halfway, and I'm producing their album at the moment. So I sort of see the Brisbane scene through their eyes, and also my son, who's 15, is just starting to play in a band, and so he's seeing things, and I pick up things from him, and in a way, I'm happy that he's in Brisbane in a band, that he's starting at 15. I think it's a good time and a good place for him. I can't imagine really at the moment any better place for him. That's my vote of confidence.
We're going to have to wrap it up. Thanks for coming down, everybody. There's just one thing. I've been thinking about the go-betweens and what they've meant to me. and a little lesson I could take from the Go-Betweens and Robert's career is that books matter, ideas matter, songs matter, art matters. You know, the world can change, you know, technology, everything, that all changes, but all those basic things, they still matter. They mattered then, they matter now, you know. That's where a lot of great music comes from.
I agree with you, Noel.
Thanks, Robert. We've really enjoyed the night.
Thank you. Thanks, Noel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those amazing insights into the origins and evolution of the Go-Betweens and your own personal musical journey. If anyone wants to revisit this conversation, we'll have it online, available for download in the next few days. And we'll also have other live talks. On the 18th of July, we'll have Tim Stewart from Scream Theatre here, followed in August by Katie Noonan. And we have loads and loads happening as part of the live Queensland Band Culture program. We've had performances by Velociraptor and the Multi Lovers and plenty more. So download our app, visit our website or pick up a program, and we hope to see you back here again soon. Thank you.